there's, um, this idea of reflection and reconsidering the past and where I've come from and who I might be, the things that I'm, sort of, might be uh, disappointed in myself with. But nonetheless, I hope my writer knows my name. I hope that the person that I'm in intimate relationship with, or I hope that God knows who I am and knows my name. As the song goes on, and I get to the third verse, and I'm sort of in the valley of the shadow of death, and I'm facing, the future, and I'm facing the abyss. It turns into not, I know my writer knows my name, but I hope my writer knows my name because ultimately I have doubts, right?
Right.
And I wonder, is God watching me? Does God know my name? Or if I'm talking about human relations, can we really communicate with each other? Are we really able to see each other and to hear each other and to hold each other? Sometimes I don't know. And so I hope we do. I hope my writer knows my name.
Welcome, 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 everyone. I am Naama Sagal Karis, and this is How Do You Jew, the podcast that highlights the diversity of the Jewish experience so that we can love our fellow like ourselves and we can get Mashiach already. I
Absolutely.
have with me an amazing, incredible Jew. He is, I don't know if I'd say a Renaissance man or maybe, I don't know, like an Enlightenment man or, Industrial Revolution man. He knows a lot of things. He is very good at many things. And I just to name a few, he's a poet, he's an author, he's a musician. He is a observant Jew in his way, which is all I care about. And he also just cares deeply for the Jewish community, both locally, I know, and worldwide. So without further ado, this is Ethan Davidson.
How's it going?
Thank you
Yay.
so much for being here.
Well,
I'm
thanks
so
for having
psyched.
me. Thanks for having me,
So
Nama.
now tell me a little bit about this incredible ensemble I'm seeing here. There's like a really cool tie with like maybe a bolo or something on it. And then
Oh,
I've got like the hat here. What is this?
yeah, some little, I don't know, piece of silver here. It's funny. I didn't think about it until just now, but I was reading on the DAF today in Shavuos, there was a bit about, if it's a financial oath, it's, has to be worth at least two silver pruta or something like that anyway. And I was just like, oh yeah, I got one piece of silver here. So
Got to keep something on me at all times.
it's something to remind us of the DAF, exactly. But yeah, and then just a cowboy t-shirt and I spared you
I
the cowboy hat today, although I wear lots of hats. So
well, and I'm that's like figuratively and literally.
right,
I
exactly.
also noticed there is kind of an affinity for the Wild West in your motif a little bit. Is that true?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I grew up, partly on the western slope of Colorado. My father had an old cattle ranch out there. We didn't have cattle, but it was the buildings were from like the 1870s or something like that. So, that always felt a little bit like home to me, out west. And of course, I lived in a rural community in Alaska for a while. So when I'm sitting here in Detroit, which is a great city, um, I'm like, and I like being in Detroit, but I'm also sort of like, where's my horse? Where are my mountains? I got to dress like a cowboy and walk the streets of Detroit.
I got to tell you, it hasn't been until this exact moment that you said that I correlated two different facts. The first is 1 in 6 cowboys in the West was a Jew.
Yeah.
The second is
Well,
that we are the original lonely cowboy out in nature talking to God
for sure.
because of
For sure.
Hitbodedut.
Keep what to do.
So,
Exactly.
like, I wonder if that was like the plan the whole time. Like Hashem invented Hitbodedut so we could have lonely cowboys and lonely cowboy songs.
Rav Nachman was a lonesome gunslinging cowboy.
Oh my gosh, get along, little doggy. All right.
Exactly.
So that's amazing. I love that. I want to hear that story too. But like I said, I want to be mindful of your time. I know you
Sure.
have a million things going on. So, as most of my listeners, all three of you know, um, this podcast was the brainchild of me being sick of waiting for Mashiach. And if there's something I can do to get Mashiach right now, I'm going to do it. So, the Hafta L'Recha Kamocha is like
Absolutely.
it's in a poster above my head. Like it's
No.
everything I do all the time. I'm not here
Mhm.
to judge, I'm here to love. And I
Right.
wanted to highlight amazing Jews who are doing Judaism differently. And literally, you were the first person in my mind when I thought of this podcast because you Jew differently than everybody else. And I love that. And I know you
Well,
give Hashem so much nachas from it because you
well,
are walking the path that was carved for you.
yeah.
So before I get into everything, I do want to hear a little bit about your origin story. Can you tell us about yourself, where you're from, what you're doing now, and how
Sure.
your Jewish identity kind of shapes you?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's interesting. I mean, I wasn't born Jewish, to be honest. I was born I mean, I was, raised in a Jewish family, adopted by a Jewish family at birth, but I was born in well, it was like a far left-wing Marxist anti-government commune from a group called the Weather Underground, and they were this was the group that bombed I'm not saying that this is something that you should do. Against violence, but this was the group that bombed the 1968 Democratic National Convention.
Yes,
So
I
in
know that
Chicago.
story.
So
Wow.
that's where I was born. My biological mother was a teenage girl, and her sister was part of the Weather Underground. So they had, a doctor in common with the family that ultimately adopted me, and so I ended up. The irony is that my biological mother's family, she and all her sisters married. They ultimately all married Jews. So they all also became
Hashem
Jews.
got Hashem's way,
Exactly.
one way or the
They
other.
all became Jews one way or the other. But the so I was adopted into a Jewish family. The rabbi who handled my conversion, such as it was as an infant, was Rabbi Erwin Groner of blessed memory. He was educated at the Skokie Yeshiva, so he came originally out of an Orthodox world, and our family was traditional, although it evolved over time as families often do. I think my for the longest time it was really just my father and me, and our home became more. It was very kosher when I was a kid, right? But things
Mhm.
go through their own evolutions.
Of
I
course.
would I went to a Jewish day school, as a child, and we were very involved. My father was very involved in a local, well, Sharet Tzedek, Congregation Sharet Tzedek, which I know you're familiar with
Mhm.
here in Detroit. He was the president of Sharet Tzedek, as was his grandfather. And so he was very dedicated to the Jewish people. Not he. I wouldn't describe him as a religious man, but he was very Jewish and had, that Yiddishkeit was something that was just, he had it in his bones, right? It
Right.
was, you sort of, you meet, you meet people that maybe they don't necessarily study, but they have, these texts sort of already written on their being, on their fiber. So my
It's
father
written in their bones.
was written in their bones, and that was really my father, alav shalom. He really had that. So, um, and there wasn't a Jewish high school. There wasn't a non-Orthodox Jewish high school when I was growing up, not locally. And so then I went to public school. I was always interested in religion and philosophy, and my family all thought that I would grow up to become a rabbi. Um,
Well, that's always
and
the hope, isn't it?
that's always the hope. Although actually you know, a lot of my family members didn't necessarily want that, but I will be getting smicha later this year. So
Are you serious?
yeah, for
Where
sure.
are you getting smicha from?
Well, a friend had, a couple of friends over the years that I study with had asked me this, why don't you get smicha? And I've kind of, dismissed it. I'm like, look, some people call me rabbi. They think I'm a rabbi, whatever, that's fine. I'm like, I don't need a title or anything. But a friend in Chicago, Rabbi B'nai Lappe, had asked me, and I, if I would do that. I said, look, I can't come to Chicago and go through your whole program there. And she said, no, you don't have to, with your books and everything, and you're already doing rabbi. You just have to tell me if you want smicha. So I came back and asked a couple of friends around here. I asked Rabbi Asher Lapatin and a few others, in the Orthodox space, what do you think? And they said, well, you tell her yes. Why don't you get smicha, whatever. Tell her yes. So I went back and told her yes, and so I'll get smicha this later in August. So I guess I'll officially be.
Right in the lead up to Elul and Tishrei.
That's right. Exactly.
Wow. Did you
Yeah.
ever think you would walk into Tishrei with smicha?
No, I guess I hadn't really, like I said, I mean, over the years when people have suggested it, I kind of like, well, whatever. It's not. Look, I mean, seriously, the thing is like if people, you know, if people think community thinks you're a rabbi, they call you rabbi, they come to you for advice and you really want, or they come to you for learning or whatever, and you really want to do your best to sort of ask the right questions and help them where it seems that they need help. You want to take that kind of stuff seriously, right?
Of course.
And if they want to call you rabbi because of that, because they think that you've done a good job sort of helping them through whatever it is that they need help with, then great, then you're doing rabbi. And at least to me, because I kind of view it as which comes to my whole Jewish practice and music practice is it's part of like a psychotherapy practice for me. And I use the Jewish texts as a tool to unlock those things inside of us that we might not be completely aware of, or where we may have blockages. So if I'm, really sincerely trying to help people to the best of my ability in that way, and people then identify that as being somehow uh, like doing the rabbi thing. Okay, well then, okay, fine. I guess I'm a rabbi, so fine. You know.
Well, it also sounds better than Guru. Like Guru
Yeah.
Ethan
Oh yeah.
sounds
Yeah.
bad, but like Rabbi Ethan sounds really
Right.
good. Plus, the parking at the front of the building is always really nice.
Yeah, it's always good. Well, I'm only in it for the parking spaces.
Exactly. I would be too. Same,
Yeah,
same. So now I heard a little birdie tell me that you have a new book.
yeah,
I would love
yeah.
to hear the title and what inspired you to write it.
Well, I have a new book. The title is, and I want to give a trigger warning, I guess, because the book is about sexual violence in the Jewish texts, and it's my translation of a pasuk in Parsha Kitisa. So the title of the book is "And they rose early to do sexual violence," and so it deals with which is my
Which is
translation
from the
of.
Parsha. He did not
Yeah,
come up with that title himself. That is
no,
from Torah.
that's from Torah, and it's from. I mean, it's my translation of Torah. It's in the episode of the Golden Calf, and I'm
Mhm,
translating the word there that's tzachek
mhm.
as sexual violence, and I bring in Chazal and other classical commentators to make the case of why I'm translating the word that way. It's a subject that I've studied for years in Chavrusa, and it was interesting to me um, for various reasons, which I go into at the beginning of the book. And um, I thought over the years, I'll write a book on this subject at some point. And then what happened was October 7th happened, and in particular, the sexual violence that was a component of the Hamas attacks, which was either sort of dismissed by, some non-Jewish friends of mine, or also people in positions of power. They said there wasn't any such thing as sexual violence. Or what was even worse, I think, was when people in positions of power wanted to contextualize that violence and say, well, yes, there was sexual violence, but you have to understand, like this is what happens, and as if sometimes, sexual violence is justified. And I'm like, well, no, wait a minute. It's never justified, first of all, right? So, and I think,
It
I'm
really,
like,
really isn't.
no, it really isn't. And I was like starting with the assumption that like, all reasonable people on the planet, whether they're Jewish or Christian or Muslim or Buddhist or whatever, should be able to say sexual violence is always bad, period, full stop.
You
But
would think,
you would
you would
think,
think,
you would think. So I wanted to, so at the beginning of the book, I talk a little bit about October 7th, but I didn't want to write, really a political book. I wanted to say, look, I'm writing this because of this. And I want to explore episodes of sexual violence in the text, and then even more importantly, um, how do we respond in those texts to the sexual violence? And
meaning
you
in the
know,
moment in the Parsha or us as the reader reading it now in present day?
no, in the Parsha and in
Okay.
the in another of our classical texts, and to help us unpack um, what are the appropriate limits of that response. I mean, if somebody attacks us, we have a right slash obligation to prosecute, those criminals.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, obviously, that takes, the form of a war when it's not just a rodef, but when it's an attacking, force, right?
Right.
Um, and yet, often in the texts, because these are texts, our classical texts are texts that reflect the human reality, is even in those cases, sometimes those responses can spiral out of control themselves. I mean, we think about, the rape of Dinah, or we think about the uh, the sexual violence at the end of the book of Shoftim, at the end of the book of Judges, and then I bring in the classical commentators to comment on those episodes. Uh, and it's interesting because in the case of the rape of Dinah, you have commentators like Maimonides, like the Rambam, who ultimately says, no, the people of Shechem had an obligation to bring their prince to justice for raping Dinah, so they were all culpable in some way, and so Shimon and Levi had a right to prosecute them. You have another commentator, like the Maharal of Prague, who softens it somewhat, but ultimately he too finds the subjects of Shem somehow culpable, right? You have others like Nachmanides, the Ramban, who says, no, these people were, innocent subjects of Shem. They would have been afraid to bring this prince to justice. It was wrong for Shimon and Levi to massacre the entire population. And I was introduced to a book, I'm looking at it right now, which I only came across after I wrote my book, written by a woman called Athalia Brenner. It's called I Am, Biblical Women Tell Their Own Stories. And she writes in the voice of Dinah in this book. And I found it very interesting because Brenner makes the case in Dinah's voice that, no, look, Shimon and Levi were the only ones who stood up for me. I absolutely, um, respect that they massacred this population. And, you know, I think Brenner's take was pretty interesting there. I don't know, that that's where I come out, but look, it's a point of view, and I mean, and a woman sort of deals with this kind of violence or is subject to this kind of violence. I can appreciate where Brenner is coming from on that. You know, that my father Jacob, was trying to make deals, and Shimon and Levi, um, took the matter into their own hands. So my book is about those kind of things, the sexual violence or any kind of violence like that where we're attacked. um, our obligation and our right to defend ourselves or to defend others from that kind of violence. And then what do our sources say about the limits of what's appropriate and what's not appropriate? And I'm not coming up with answers necessarily. I'm just wanting to raise the question so that we can have discussions about it. And I've been on this book tour on and off over the last year, and the discussions have been great. They've been sober, they've been serious. There hasn't been any disruptors, thank God. And uh, and the book ends up in a positive place about healthy relationships. So it's not all dark.
And
And
you
that's the
said
book.
you weren't sure if you should be a rabbi.
Well,
Really? Come on.
well, I
Of
think
all the
that's
topics in Torah you could wrestle with, you picked that to write a book about?
yeah,
You
yeah.
are clearly a rabbi in a cowboy hat.
In a cafe, exactly.
Yeah.
The Frisco Kid, if you remember that movie, that one with Harrison Ford and
Kid
Gene
rabbi.
Wilder. Yeah, exactly.
So now this actually begs the question,
Yeah,
as a Jew who does his Judaism in his own unique way,
yeah.
what are you wrestling with when it comes to Torah and Judaism? And what is it that you're in love with about Torah and Judaism?
Oh gosh, there's a lot that I wrestle with in the texts. I mean,
Same,
yeah, there's a
same.
lot and it's here. So here's my thing, I guess, a way of, you know, zooming. If I zoom way out
Mm,
with the texts and what do I wrestle with? I approach them. I mean, okay, so I find things in the text that really bother me, and I find things in the text that I really disagree with sometimes, and I wish that they weren't there,
yeah.
right? Whatever they may be, right? And
So say we all.
we all, yeah, exactly. And and but what I decided years ago was how am I going to approach those kind of things? I mean, on the one hand, I could say, well, look, um, these texts were all just made up. You know, the documentary hypothesis, there's like 4 or 5 different texts that have been edited and stitched together, and it was all just written by some guys sitting in some caves, and they just made this stuff up. And I could hold that view, and so then I could dismiss the really problematic things and just say, well, it's not real anyway. It was just, but I decided years ago that I wasn't going, whether or not that's true, I decided years ago that that wasn't going to be my approach to it because I didn't want to give myself a get out of jail free card with the text in that
You
way.
wanted to make yourself wrestle.
Yeah, for sure. I wanted
I
to give
love
myself,
that so much. I am of the
yeah,
same mindset.
yeah. I mean, you have to, I think, at least for me, I don't want to say you, but at least for me, I don't, the stuff that makes me uncomfortable, I want to like run towards it, right?
Yes, that's
And
literally what I tell my coaching clients. If it scares you, run towards it.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so then I take the point of view that, okay, it's not written by a bunch of guys in caves. It's not like it's a divine text, handed down from God through Moshe at Sinai. And that takes away my get out of jail free card. And so then I may still be really uncomfortable with many things in the text, and I may not find a way out, but at least I feel like I'm being more honest about it that way.
Is there any, other than obviously the subject matter of your book, is there any
Yeah.
other, could you give an example of something that you've wrestled? I ask this in particular because my hope is that the Jews that do tune in and listen,
Yeah.
maybe they haven't really thought much about their Judaism and they're listening to these stories to understand they have full permission to be as much of who they are as they can be. And if there's a nugget of something that bugs you, it might bug them too, and they still have permission to Jew as much as they want. Is
For
there
sure.
any example you can come up with?
Well, I'll mention really quickly a couple of like sort of to me obvious easy ones, and then I'll get to one that I'm working on for
Yeah,
a new
please.
book, God willing. Um, there's the obvious to me the obvious easy ones that are like the Jews have just come out of slavery in Egypt, right?
Right.
And then God says, and then when you have a slave, it's like, wait, hang on, wait a minute. Like, I thought we just got rid, like, why are we having slaves now? Anyway, so that's one thing. Or you can have sort of things in the Talmud that, about whether women can give testimony in court, or this whole idea about, women are not obligated in time-bound mitzvot because they're not masters of their own time and their own schedule. And I'm thinking, well, okay, but what if I mean, the CEO of General Motors is a woman, so she's not like, she's not Jewish, but Mary Barra, so she's not the she's not the master of her. She runs General Motors, for crying out loud,
Yeah,
right? So,
exactly.
right.
Exactly.
She's not qualified to give testimony in court. I mean, come on, right? So there's
Yes.
those kind of things. But so the thing that I'm wrestling with now, and I've been studying for a couple of years, and I've started writing what, God willing, will be a book, is the story of the blasphemer that occurs in Leviticus chapter 24, and it's one of the two narrative sections in the book of Leviticus. And the story as it appears in Leviticus is very economical. Let's say we don't get a lot of detail, but there's a bunch of rabbinic literature on this guy, and we don't know his name. What we know is that his mother was an Israelite of the tribe of Dan, but his father was Egyptian. So he's a person of complicated identity. And I think this is like really relevant for today, when people's identity, people can have multiple identities. Their identities can be fractured in some way, either because, they're
Well, there's overlap
there's
in
overlap.
people's
They come from a
identity.
mixed household, or
Of
they have,
course.
or they have, um, you know, or it's a gender identity thing, or sexuality, where they can have fractured identities in lots of different ways, or complicated identities in lots of different ways,
Right.
right? And so I think this character is a character that can really speak for our time. He's a person of complicated identity. He doesn't fit like in the he doesn't seem to fit into the larger community. He has been he's at the back of the line in the desert. He's been brutally attacked by Amalek because he's identified as an Israelite, right? Um, and other things that sort of he has to endure through his life, which are really put him in a very vulnerable situation. So at some point he decides, you know what, my mother is over there with the tribe of Dan. I want to be with the tribe of Dan. And he approaches the tribe of Dan, tries to pitch his tent there, and they said, no, you can't join us, because to be a member of the tribe of Dan, your father has to be from the tribe of Dan, but your father was an Egyptian, so you're not allowed to be here.
Hmm.
And he's like, well, yeah, but look, I've just been like brutally attacked over
I
here
just got my butt handed to me for this people. Can't
for
you
this
let me
people.
in?
Yeah, can't you let me in? And, it leads to a fight. In the rabbinic literature, it turns out that, people say really nasty things about his mother. And he takes his case to Moses. And it's interesting because Moses is also a person of complicated
He
identity.
sure is.
He's Israelite, but his wife is not an Israelite. His
And he
children
was
are,
raised as an Egyptian.
and he was raised an Egyptian. So this guy, the son of the Egyptian and the son of the Israelite woman, he goes to the court of Moses, and he says, makes his case,
Hmm.
and and ultimately he's ruled against. Moses says, I can't help you,
Yeah.
and the guy freaks out and he blasphemes God, and they take him out and they execute him. And it's like, wait a minute. Like, really? There was no, and it's like, I get that the law is the law. Okay, tribal affiliation is patrilineal. Israelite identity is matrilineal, but to be a member of a tribe, your father has to be of that tribe. So I get it. But there's no other way we could find a home for this guy. He's looking for community. He's looking for protection. He's looking to not be vulnerable anymore. We couldn't help him in some kind of way.
Yeah,
and
I'm biting my tongue right now. I have so much to say.
right,
And yes, and then what do we do for children of rape? And what do we do for,
right,
all of these victims of war and all of these circumstances
exactly.
that we're supposed to be showing rachamim and we don't?
That's right.
I resonate with your struggle.
Yeah, yeah. And so
Yeah.
that's a tough one. A friend of mine down in in the Yeshivish part of the community down here in Oak Park, I was talking about this with him the other day, and we got into that question of like, can't you help that guy? And so my friend said, he said, look, it's interesting because when you come later to the story of the daughters of Tzolofchad,
Yes.
they're coming to Moses with a problem too. They're saying,
Right.
our father didn't have any sons. He only had daughters. The law does not allow us to inherit our father's property.
Mm-hmm.
And and so the law is the law, and that could be the end of the story. But in that case, Moses does go, and asks God, and they find a solution for these women that, they can inherit their father's property. And so my friend was saying, maybe that represents some kind of an evolution in Moses's thinking, is that he's like back in that place with the blasphemer, and he's like, we're not going to do that again, where we said no.
Well, yeah, in the
Right.
first story, he doesn't go to God and say, "Listen, I need you to do me a solid." The
No,
second time he does, which
that's
means
right.
he was growing some courage.
Exactly.
And I love that
Exactly.
interpretation. Thank you for giving me something positive to end that on. Oh my gosh. Whew. So
Yeah,
now tell me something, just one,
sure.
one thing you love about Torah and being Jewish and Judaism.
Oh gosh, I mean, I love. There's a lot. I love, I think the big holiday here for us, probably the one that resonates with me more than anything, is Sukkot. So I do love, being in there with the kids and sleeping out. And I know we're a long way from Sukkot, but that's a big one around here. I mean, I love being with people, in real time and in real space, and just being together, especially in that place where we have nothing but the stars above our heads.
Back to the cowboy sentiment.
Exactly.
I am
I
I
guess
am
so,
so biased. I love being able to count the stars and look at the moon
for
and
sure.
being like halachically obligated to do it. It feels so
Right.
good.
It
That's
does.
just a thing. I completely agree. So
Big one.
now in terms of your love affair with Torah, you've described
Mhm.
Torah as a mirror. So
Yeah.
what are some reflections that surprised you when you were writing your book?
Well, I think, where I started to really think about that idea was a couple of years ago. And I write about this in the first book, which is called, These Are the Developments of the Human. And and by the way, if your listeners, want, they can contact me in a private message on social media, and I'll tell them how to get the book, because I don't sell them through like normal channels. But so in the first book, I write about this mirror idea. It was really, um, when I read the first couple of verses of Genesis, the first couple of psakim of Bereshis, I yes, it's about the creation of the world. There's dark, there's a void, God's face is hovering over the surface of the deep, whatever any of that
Mm-hmm.
means.
Mm-hmm.
And then God says, let there be light, or maybe let there be conscious awareness, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, that's all great. I don't, the creation of the world, yeah, I get it, but I don't know, that doesn't relate to my experience, because I'm living in a created world here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I started to think, um, the human is created in the image of God, right? So let's
Mm-hmm.
separate that, you know, God at the beginning for the human. If maybe we can do a transposition there. And then I thought, okay, well, what's the fathomless dark depth that my face is hovering over? I'm like, well, that's maybe my interior psychology. There's things about myself that I don't know, or that I don't understand. There's like unexplored corners of my heart, and my face kind of hovers over that fathomless depth. And I say, let me bring conscious awareness to that depth, and then start to be able to name things. This is dry land, and this is sea, or this is this kind of feeling, or this is how I react in this kind of situation. And I begin to like put names to those things and begin to understand them. And so I realized like what I'm doing in that process then is sort of looking at myself in a mirror, looking at myself in an X-ray mirror, if you will, and begin to understand what motivates me. Why do I react this way in this kind of situation? And where do I learn about those kind of things in the text? And how does the text help me to unpack some of these things? Um,
So you're basically describing, comparing on the macro, Hashem evolving the light and the dark into all created matter, and then siphoning it down as a micro comparison
yeah,
to the journey towards self-identity and
that's right.
evaluating and self-awareness of self-identity,
Exactly
because
right.
there's that space between I know who I am and I don't know who I am. There's the
That's right.
discovery piece of it where you have to even become conscious of the fact that you're walking the path of becoming aware.
That's exactly right.
That's
That's
so
exactly right.
interesting. I love that.
That's exactly right. So that's what I mean about it being a psychotherapeutic tool.
It sounds like it. It definitely does.
Yeah.
It sounds like it might help even more people than I initially thought. Wow.
Yeah.
Now, I do have to do the thing because it's the
Sure.
name of the podcast. So let me ask you,
Yeah.
in your own unique way, I want to know, how do you Jew? How do you bring your own unique flavor of Judaism and your neshama to the world and in your everyday life? How do you Jew, Ethan Davidson?
How do I do? Well, there's a couple different ways. I mean, so I work for my late father's, family foundation.
Mm-hmm.
We do a number. That's the William Davidson Foundation, and as among other things we do, I think our central work is around Jewish education, Jewish literacy, Jewish
Mm-hmm.
community.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the ways in which I Jew was because of working there. Um, Although I had been studying all kinds of different religions, all kinds of different philosophies, both in college, grad school, and whatever, I decided, okay, well, I need to now really focus on my own Jewish learning so I can be the most Jewish. If I'm going to make decisions about Jewish education, I have to be like the most Jewishly educated, right?
Right.
Or the
That's just
most
a matter of
Jewishly
accountability.
That's
That's what
just a
that
matter of
is.
accountability, right? I feel like I wouldn't be doing my job responsibly if I weren't as Jewishly literate as I could be, right? I
You
want to
realize how uncommon a
be,
mindset that is, right?
yeah, maybe so. I don't know, but I want to be good at my job, right?
That's
But
so fantastic. I'm in awe of that sentence alone.
so that's one part of it. That's one part of how I do. And then I think the other thing is really with either the writing and or the music. I I I that's again all part of my psychotherapy practice. A lot of the not all of the song lyrics, but a good number of the song lyrics are sort of Jewishly informed. It's not Jewish music per se, but I'm lifting things from the texts and sort of coding them in this Americana music. And so it's there if if it's there to be found by the listener. And again, it's part of my psychotherapy practice, but I want to do that practice, publicly, right? Because it's also a way to, hopefully meet people. And I'm not just trying to entertain people. I'm trying to do that as well, I guess. But the most important thing is to that maybe something that I've said or put forth in a song really resonates with somebody, and they say, I feel that same way too. I've had that same struggle too, and I develop a relationship with that person, and that's happened from time to time. So when
So do
people
you
say,
do you do you find that, like, when you drop these breadcrumbs in the lyrics in the book, Because, in 500 years, some new Chazal is going to go, okay, well, Rav Davidson wrote this book. And in this one, he dropped this hint. And the
Yeah.
pardes of this means this. So, like, clearing it up for future generations, is it haphazard, or do you choose these bits and pieces that you convey because you want to teach an idea or an ethic or tell a story or trigger a reflection in the listener?
Yeah, I think it's all those things. Trigger a reflection. Sometimes I want to tell a story through the song. Um, I was thinking about I have the first song on my new album that just came out in the last couple weeks is a song called "I Know My Rider Knows My Name," and it's an Americana. The music is just straight Americana kind of music. And what I was thinking there, just to give you an idea of my approach, is, rider, um, in like, Mississippi blues kind of vernacular, rider is like a sexual partner. I'm not talking about a sexual partner in this case. I wanted to use that word, but I'm using it not that way. I'm using it just as a stand-in for an intimate relationship, in this case, an intimate relationship with God,
Mm,
or an intimate relationship with, the person that I'm in an intimate relationship with, my wife, or anybody else who I love. And so the song kind of goes through, and there's um this idea of reflection and reconsidering the past and where I've come from, and who I might be, the things that I'm, sort of might be uh, disappointed in myself with. But nonetheless, I hope my rider knows my name. I hope that the person that I'm in intimate relationship with, or I hope that God knows who I am and knows my name. As the song goes on, and I get to the third verse, and I'm sort of in the valley of the shadow of death, and I'm facing, the future, and I'm facing the abyss. It turns into not, I know my writer knows my name, but I hope my writer knows my name, because ultimately I have doubts, right?
right.
And I wonder, is God watching me? Does God know my name? Or if I'm talking about human relations, can we really communicate with each other? Are we really able to see each other and to hear each other and to hold each other? Sometimes I don't know. And so I hope we do. I hope my writer knows my name, but I'm not sure that I know that, all the time.
That
Uh,
literally sounds like it epitomizes the concept of wrestling.
yes. Yeah, I think
It's
so.
it's like that should be the theme song for Tishrei. Like
Yeah.
that's everything that I feel in the ramp up through Elul to Tishrei. That's for those of you who don't keep any of these holidays yet. That Elul Tishrei vibe is this hurry up and wait feeling of let's
Right.
let's clean up, let's shine up, let's take stock, let's evaluate, and then hold on, wait a minute. Uh-oh, now we're actually being judged. Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
Yeah,
We don't know entirely how the outcome's going to be. And it's that
exactly.
sensation of I want, I need, I desire, I drive, I strive, and then oh man, I hope I did it.
I hope I did it. Yeah. Yeah. I can
Wow.
feel certain at some point, right? I can
Yeah.
feel certain about it. But then it's like when I get there, or I face mortality or the darkness or whatever, it's like I'm not so certain now.
Yeah.
I hope, but I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know.
That's incredible. What a great I need to listen to the song. Which album is it on?
It's on the new album that just came out. The album's called Cordelia.
Okay.
You can find it on all streaming platforms,
I'm
and
excited.
yeah, it's the very first song.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So, what do you hope that your readers will take away from the book, and how do you hope that it changes the way they engage with Torah?
Well, I hope that my readers take away from the book that, that whatever they believe, okay, they're religious, they're not religious, whatever, it doesn't matter to me. But, our classic texts, which have, you know, grown far beyond Judaism. I mean, I understand that the Bible is like the world's bestseller or something like that,
Eh,
but
and followed immediately after by the IKEA catalog. That is not a
right,
true statistic.
exactly. But that these, so you're religious or you're not religious, you believe whatever you believe about these texts, but that these texts can be a really valuable tool for sort of helping us to unpack whatever questions we may have about what we see in the world, what we see in ourselves. Um, but that you have to really engage with them on a deep level. I mean, I think that's why um, we still read them and we still wrestle with them because the text has been useful in that way. And so I hope that people see that they can take the text seriously. Um, if they're afraid that it's going to make them religious, well, let's not worry about that, right? Maybe it will, but that they can find themselves in the text, I believe, and that they'll see in my book. Um, Hopefully, they'll see that I've that's the work that I've been engaged in is trying to find myself in the text and try to answer questions that I have, and that they can use the text in the same kind of way.
Well,
But that's the
what you're
idea.
describing is recognizing that you might be reflected in that text, even if it's not in a great way,
That's
and
right.
that's a shade of humanity too.
Oh, for 100%, a hundred
That's
percent.
that's
Yeah,
fantastic. That's
yeah, yeah,
fantastic.
yeah.
So I am curious because
Sure.
for those of you who are only listening, Ethan is getting his steps in, bless him, and he is
Yeah.
walking around what appears to be an immense library, kind of like Hogwarts. And
Oh,
I
yeah.
see Judaica on the walls everywhere,
For sure.
and so much beautiful, you know, like awareness surrounding him, completely enveloping him in Jewish identity on all sides. And so now I'm curious. Can
Hmm.
you give me one Jewish tradition or a Jewish value or a Jewish experience that holds deep meaning for you and why?
One Jewish value that holds meaning for me, I think it's this. I mean, people come to me. I'll give you two questions that people ask me, but I come to the same answer for them. Sometimes people come to me and they say, "I want to study Kabbalah. I want to study esoteric, wisdom and esoteric knowledge."
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, that's great, and you should do that. I'm probably not your teacher for that. I have some experience with it, but I'm not. And I said, but it's great. But how about we live in this world? You know? So, why don't we, figure out how to live better in this world rather than I'm not nothing against Kabbalah, and I love it too, but let's live here. And or people say, maybe I want to be Jewish, right? I want to talk to you about converting. And, we have this principle in the Talmud that says people come, they want to convert, we're supposed to turn them away, right? 3 times, right? I'm like, I don't turn them away, but I say this, I'm like, look, you don't have to be, first of all, you don't have to be Jewish, right? Just,
Correct.
you don't get any extra candy. You don't get to go to a
Oh, no,
different
you just get extra jobs.
you get extra jobs. You get extra
Mm-hmm.
jobs. I said, you don't have to be Jew. You just have to not be a jerk,
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
not to say, and then I'm quickly saying, I'm not saying that you're a jerk. I'm just saying, like, the whole thing is, which comes back to living in this world, is you just have to be a human being and to treat other people that you meet like human beings. People say to me like, you can it's easy for you to say this or say that, you live in a nice house, you have a nice life, you're pretty well off. And I say, yeah, but you could be living under a bridge, have nothing, and you're going to meet somebody else. And the question is, even there under that bridge, are you going to treat that other person like a human being, or are you going to not treat them like a human being? We all have that ability. And I think ultimately that's what Judaism is about. You see even your enemy struggling over there, his donkey, whatever that may be, in our modern sensibilities, struggling. Your enemy is having some kind of struggle. Help his animal out, however you understand that, right? It's
Right.
like, why are you continuing to be a jerk to this guy?
Mhm.
He might be a jerk to you. I don't know. But the point is, it's like his donkey is struggling over there. Come on, what's wrong with you?
So holding yourself to the highest standard that you can.
Holding yourself to the highest standard that you can. You hear a story about a guy that is, you know, a religious guy, a frum guy. He wants to buy his wife flowers before Shabbat. Time is running out. Um, he's got to buy the flowers before time runs out and get home. But in the meantime, because he's in such a hurry, he's stepping over people in the grocery line. I mean, what's wrong with you? What, what, those are human
Uh-huh.
beings too. Don't don't
Yeah,
don't
actually.
step on people in the grocery line. I mean, yes, your wife is important. The flower is important. It's important to
I'm
get
sure
all
that
that
was
done
in Beersheba in Israel like last
before
Friday.
last Friday. Sure, exactly, like 100 times.
100%.
So treat people like a human being. You know,
That which is loathsome to you, do not do to your fellow.
don't do to your fellow. Exactly.
That's such a I just so it's not that it's a pet peeve of mine, but it's just something that so frequently comes up in conversations that I have with people, that there are just basic concepts that are inherently Jewish concepts, and
Right.
yet
Yeah.
people skip over them.
Oh, people
Like,
skip
no,
over
no,
them
no, I'm
all.
going to learn Gemara today. No, no, you're going
Yeah.
to be respectful and polite to your neighbor down the street. That's what you're going to
Exactly.
do.
That's what. Yeah.
Like,
Exactly.
like we don't need to be high minded when we're omitting the base foundational
That's right.
concepts first.
That's right. That's
Very
right.
simple, straightforward stuff.
For sure.
Now, I am also a little curious.
Sure.
Um, I know that with the book, the way that you wrote it, and I mean, obviously, it's got a controversial title, controversial subject matter. I
Yeah.
also am aware that you wrote it in a non traditional, not conventional writing style. And
Yeah.
I find that fascinating as an author myself. I would love to know a little bit about what kind of style is it,
Mm.
and how did you decide to do that style?
Well, it's I call it like kind of broken poetry. And how I developed, I mean, I think being a songwriter, first of all, of course, doing more academic writing when I was back in graduate school, or for work, I have to pay attention to grammar and
Mm-hmm.
all that. With this, it really started with the previous book, where I had all these notes from different chavrusas, and I had had it in my mind to
Learning
organize them.
partnerships for folks.
Learning partnerships, and I had it in my mind that I would organize all these notes at some point over the years. And when COVID hit, I didn't have anything to do but organize all these notes from these. But I didn't want to write an academic piece on all of them. So I decided, what I'll do is I'll write it in this kind of broken poetry. I'll uh, I'll take the William S. Burroughs approach to writing. I'll cut the Torah and the tradition up into little bits, throw it up in the air, stitch it back together, and see what happens and see what emerges. And so that's how the first book turned out. And so the first book has a lot of different ideas, and it's written mostly in that broken poetry style. I wanted to have each line be like a breath. So if each
Mm.
line was only going to be like 3, 4, 5 words, that's what I wanted. And then I wanted like half of the page to be blank so that you, the reader, could fill in,
Fill it in.
complete the work, and then maybe someday we get a chance to meet and talk about, what you discovered in the work. And so then when I did this book, I thought, well, that was a nice approach. I want to do that again. And this is obviously a much more focused book than the first one was, but I wanted to maintain that approach. I think that it was also, to me, from what I've heard, from readers, is that it made it sort of more conversational. It made it more intimate. Um, Maybe it made the subject matter somewhat less traumatic because it was like I was there with you in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And if that stuff is true, and I believe when people told me that it is true for them, then I think, well, that's good, because that's a healing thing. If you think that, I'm not just writing some academic, cold academic piece about all this trauma. I'm actually sitting there with you, and we're discussing it. And maybe in poetry, it comes across more that way. And Um,
There's so many different reasons that I think that is such a clever way to invite people to give Torah a chance.
yeah,
As you know, I was not a practicing Jew for a good chunk of my life. I've only been
sure.
Balshuva for 7 years. And
Mm,
I was raised totally Chiloni, totally
yeah,
non-religious by two
yeah.
Israeli parents.
Mm,
Dad's a Holocaust survivor. So I came
mm,
to Judaism kind of in my 30s. And I really kind of hated Torah a lot at the
sure,
beginning
sure.
because I had either been misinformed, I had
Right,
never really read it, I couldn't read Hebrew at the time,
right.
and a lot of obstacles were in my way. And I've
Sure.
noticed with a lot of my fellows who are not very observant, they're in the same situation. They know they're Jews. They know Torah is in their spiritual DNA,
Sure.
and they feel these speed bumps. And then you add on to it something like the concept of sexual violence,
Right,
and the way that Hazal might address it, the way that the sages might address it, and it can
right.
feel incredibly hindering.
For
And for
sure.
you to write in that style to invite them to slowly digest this information, and that almost as though you're holding their hand through it,
Yeah.
is
Mm,
so welcoming. It's so refreshing because most of the time when you're a noob and you're reading anything from Torah, you feel like an ignoramus, like you need a
right,
rabbi sitting beside you just telling you what this one word means.
right, right,
And
right.
that's such a novel way to invite people to come closer.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and look, I think that's how it should be. I mean, I think that God wants, it's in my view, I think probably in yours as well, if I can speak for you, God wants an intimate relationship with the human being. And we, of course, we want intimate relationships with each other. We want to, as I was saying before, we want to really be able to see each other and hear each other and hold each other in our shared humanity. Um, and so I think, again, using Torah that way or talking about Torah in that way is helpful and healing and hopefully breaks down those barriers, whether those barriers are real or just perceived. It's we want to have that intimacy with each other, and we should be able to approach the text in that way.
I agree with you. It's interesting because in my regular life, I'm a life coach, and I specialize in dating and relationships. And one of the
Yes.
things that comes up often when we talk about developing intimacy with our partner, or if it's a single person who's learning to get into dating and getting married and learning
Right.
what intimacy ought to look like,
Mhm.
there is this recurring theme of I don't know what to do. And therefore, I'm uncertain. And therefore, I get afraid. And therefore, the intimacy is garbage.
Right.
And
Right.
that spirals into itself, and you end up with a negative feedback loop. And
Absolutely.
it's so interesting how, for some folks that, like myself and others that I've met, they have the same dynamic with learning
Yeah.
Torah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's so kind of tragic that it
Yeah.
ends up being that way, but that intimacy, it's almost as though with this particular subject matter, since it's so deep and so difficult and so challenging,
Mhm.
like I tell people when I coach them, it's okay to pause in the middle right now.
Right.
Let's take a breath
Yeah.
and hold on a second before we say the next thing, before we read the next thing, because our spiritual and physiological body needs time to metabolize this data.
Yeah.
And we can't receive that full mikubal, that full download of what we need to receive from this information, from this text, from this relationship, whatever,
Right.
if we're
Right.
rushing through this fear-based reaction.
That's right.
And it requires slowness,
Yeah.
and that's so
Absolutely.
lovely.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. No, it requires slowness. I mean, it occurs to me to say that the rabbi I mentioned earlier, one of the rabbis I study with, the one who's giving me smicha, B'nai Lappe, she does the opposite. Her approach to Talmud is the opposite of Daf Yomi. We've been learning a daf in Sanhedrin for like 2 years. We do like a word a month.
Whoa.
You know?
Talk about slowness.
Yeah. And it's like, and I
Wow.
remember this, story. It's a Buddhist story about there was some monk, whatever thought, and who knows if this is a real story or not. But
Some
anyway,
monk somewhere on a
some
mountain.
monk somewhere in China, and everybody's rushing around. So this monk, his discipline was to walk as slowly as possible. And he was so, adept at walking slowly that no one could keep up with him.
That's funny.
And so
That's
it's like,
funny.
Benet like reads, she's like that monk, but in the Talmud sense of it, where it's like, we've been on this word for, we do a word a month. I mean, it's like, so.
I can't imagine how long it would take to get through all of Gemara if you go at that speed.
Oh, it'd be like the age of the universe.
I know, right? Oh my God.
Right.
Maybe
Exactly.
that's how Hashem tells time.
Yeah, maybe so. Maybe so. Maybe
Could
so.
be.
It could be.
So we are at the top of the hour. Like I said, I wanted to be respectful of your time. I am so incredibly grateful that I had an opportunity to chat with you. You're so interesting.
Oh, well,
And
I
the
don't know.
stories and the perspective on things, I just adore it. I did have one final question, if you will
Sure.
indulge me. Can
Yeah,
you
yeah.
share one piece of insight or wisdom with the Jewish world at large? What would it be?
One insight or one piece of wisdom with the Jewish world at large. We have, we do have, and I believe this, sincerely, we do have charge as Jews to bring light to the world. I'm not saying that we always live up to that. I mean,
We're
oftentimes,
human.
unfortunately, we don't. We're human. We're
Yeah.
humans,
Mm-hmm.
well, like anybody else, right? But we do have that as our mission. Then, of course, there have been times, and we've contributed so much to civilization, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the a legal system, the whole idea
A
of
7-day work week.
a 7 day week, right? Exactly. But the whole idea that of courts and justice and all that is a Jewish idea that goes back thousands of years, right?
Right.
So, I mean, we've made contributions to civilization that go far beyond our numbers, right?
Absolutely.
And affect most of the people in the world are not Jewish, right? But these things we've contributed. So we have these things to bring to the world.
Mm.
We have to, and we have this charge, and it's up to each of us individually and collectively to participate in that.
Mm-hmm.
But to be able to do that, to be able to know how to be a human being, we have to engage with our texts in a serious way. Again, you're religious, you're not religious, that's up to you. I don't care about that, right? But in order to actualize these things, in order to be fully a human, in order to not be a jerk, in order to bring that light to the world, you have to
Mm-hmm.
engage seriously with the texts and traditions. And I think that's, to me, I haven't really found a better way of doing those kind of things. So, um, grab a hold of the texts, find a study partner, and find all the things that make you really unhappy about the text.
Start with the stuff you want to kvetch about.
That's right, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
Yeah. I love that. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I could talk your ear off for an hour, but I'm gonna close us out. Everyone, thank you again for listening in to How Do You Jew, the podcast that highlights the diversity of the Jewish experience. I hope that you enjoyed this as much as I did. This was fantastic. And remember, it doesn't matter how you Jew, it just matters that you Jew the best way that you can. All that we need to do is love each other and respect each other so we can get Mashiach already, because I really want to go see what the Beit HaMikdash looks like. And I have people I'm waiting to see, and we need to get this done. So less judging, more loving, and stay tuned. We're going to have more guests, God willing, soon. So thank you again, everyone. And thank you so much, Ethan, for being here. Have a fantastic week. And
thanks for having me.
guys later. Bye-bye.
Bye.